now that Patrick Crucius has also been sentenced to life in prison and the victim impact statements have been finished, I got the chance to sit down one-on-one earlier this afternoon as well with El Paso District Attorney James Montoya. So, Mr. Montoya, do you feel that justice was served in the Wal Mart mass shooting case?
Where the case was and how much longer the trial, the uncertainty that was left, I think if you ask the majority of the families, they would tell you that this was the just end to the case.
And why is that? If you can elaborate.
Sure. I mean, the case had dragged on for so long that I think my sense in talking to the families, there was a clear consensus that they just wanted it to be over. And to be clear, it's not that these families wanted life. Some of these families still wanted a death penalty. I know many in this community still think that the death penalty was the appropriate outcome. I think that he deserved the death penalty for what he did. But what people don't think, and I think what has been lost, is that there was still a tremendous amount of pretrial litigation. We still didn't have a certain timeline for a trial date. There was still no certainty that we would get a death verdict if there was a trial. And even if there was a death verdict, there was still literal decades of appeals down the road. And so, justice would be bringing the loved ones that were lost back. That would be true justice. We cannot get that. There are holes that can never be filled. And it's just a matter of what can we do to bring this process to an end.
What went through your head when family members of some of the victims hugged Patrick Crucius, the defendant?
Oh, it was surreal. I don't think I've ever seen a victim's family member ask to embrace the defendant, the person who killed their loved one. And when Ms. Tinajero, said that she wanted to give him a hug and she knew it wasn't allowed, and when the judge asked her, would that make you feel better? Extraordinary. We don't screen the impact statements. I had no idea that was something that she felt strongly about. Very, very surreal. And then the fact that Ms. Andre, after seeing that, wanted to come back and do the same. It's, these were both of them and others too that just exuded grace and compassion and forgiveness to someone who absolutely does not deserve it. It's very awe-inspiring.
Can you describe the process of how the hug was discussed beforehand?
It was not. It was
Wow.
not discussed beforehand. She brought it up on her own in her statement. The judge at the end of it asked her, would that really make you, bring peace? And she said it would. And so there was no discussion ahead of time before Ms. Tinajero's embrace. I know after Miss Andre came forward, we had the same conversation with her because she reapproached and asked if that was something that she could do as well. But when it first happened, there was no discussion ahead of time.
Yeah, I know you kind of addressed it a little bit, but
Right.
Out of the families that expressed being upset that the district attorney's office was not going to pursue the death penalty, did any come up to you after this period, after these statements were made by the family of the victims, and did any of them say, I know that I wanted the death penalty and we were a little bit upset, but did they express any more comfort to you?
We had a small debriefing at the end of the impact statements with some of the families that stuck around, and several of them expressed at least a greater understanding. The one thing that I want to emphasize is that there's no right way to feel. The families that wanted the death penalty, no matter how long it took, I respect that view. And there were families that felt strongly that just wanted it to be over with. And in my opinion, there's no right way to feel. there's no right way to heal. Some of the families that spoke yesterday still have, anger and disgust and resentment towards the defendant, and I think that is completely justifiable. It's not a matter of closure. I don't even like saying the word closure, because that's not the hole that has been made in their hearts is not going away, and time does not heal it. It's just a matter of continuing to live life and what their loved ones would want for them. And everybody is on a different timeline and time frame. And but at the end of it yesterday, I think there was a greater understanding, at least from some of the families that wanted to continue pursuing the death penalty. I think hearing from some of the other families that wanted it to be over, my hope is that there was a greater respect and understanding of how those families felt.
From the district attorney's perspective, how difficult is it for you to discuss with the family members after the sentencing has already happened, and okay, now it's time for you to have your impact statements? And I know there was, I believe, 35 members of families that were affected. What's the process with you informing them and telling them, hey, this is the order, here's how we're going to do it? Do you meet in person? Is this something over the phone?
Yeah, so this is actually
difficult it is.
Yeah. So this was a process that's been ongoing for weeks, honestly, months. It was something that we started shortly after I took office. I made it a priority to start meeting with the families individually, so that we could have open and honest conversations without people feeling pressured by how others felt. And as we started having those discussions and the issues that we would have moving forward and the considerations both ways, and I let them know that I would be speaking to the other families, that the decision would be mine, but that at some point, once we made the decision, that they would have an opportunity to speak, and so that they should start making plans for what they would say. It could be in person, they could submit a written statement. And so it's a process that's been ongoing. Once the plea agreement was extended, a month ago, we started making some final preparation, started organizing, started scheduling how it was going to go out. I mean, there was a tremendous amount of logistics. Very grateful to many members of my office for organizing all that. And I had heard that some of the sentencing at the federal hearing was some issues had arisen, and so we were really committed to making this as organized as possible. And even until the very end, some family members would say they wanted to speak, didn't want to speak, changed their minds, and which is totally within their right. And I hope that the way that we had it organized, at least brought some degree of comfort.
And I know sometimes it's at the judge's discretion on what points within the courtroom or what times you can bring a camera in, and cameras allowed and cameras not. How was this decision made when it came to whether or not there'd be cameras during the impact statements? Yeah,
so generally impact statements are what we would call off the record, where there's not a court reporter memorializing them. It is really just an opportunity for the victim or their family members to express how they feel, how this offense has affected them. They can address the judge or the defendant or us or the courtroom in general. And so those are generally not memorialized. And so I know the decision on the judge's part was that there would not be cameras allowed for that. The plea hearing is an open courtroom, an open hearing, and the impact statement, we didn't want anybody to feel one way or the other that this is going to be put out there. Yeah.
When Judge Sam Medrano literally told Patrick Crucius point blank, your mission to divide this city failed, you failed. What went through your head as a prosecutor?
I'm appreciative of the judge's remarks. I know a lot of folks had wanted to hear from him while the case has been pending. Judges are not supposed to comment on the case while it's ongoing, and so I'm grateful that he spoke. I think his remarks were accurate. This was a defendant that was motivated by a racist, hateful ideology. If you read the manifesto that he published, his intent was to, spark hatred, functionally start a race war and greater division. And I agree with the judge. I think that was not accomplished. If anything, this community has come out stronger. The amount of unity that emerged directly after the shooting. I know it's referenced, several times the people that lined up at the blood banks to donate immediately after. One of the Jordan Anchondo's sister spoke yesterday about, the outpouring of blessings that they received. It was really the goodwill and things that came to the families and the support that they received after this horrific event, and how much the community was there for them. And so I do think that the judge's remarks were accurate.
Do you have any regrets on how this was handled, even from the beginning before you were the district attorney?
Sure.
If you can kind of elaborate on that if you don't mind.
I regret that it's taken this long. That's what's really unfortunate, that this case dragged on for a number of reasons. The delay is multifaceted. A substantial portion of the delay was COVID, in 2020, 2021. The personnel decisions that were made by Ms. Rosales at the start of her term, those contributed immensely, in my opinion, to the delay. The delays on the federal government's part. I think it was really important when the offense happened, state charges were filed, and we immediately announced an intention to seek the death penalty. When Ms. Rosales was the DA, there was a decision to let the federal proceedings take precedence, and there was a period of over 2 years where we were waiting to figure out, was the federal government going to seek the death penalty or not. I would have hoped that in that situation, this office, the DA's office, would have fought to take precedence, if only for the fact that the decision to seek the death penalty had already been made. Mm-hmm. And we lost that whole time period. Of course, there was also the misconduct that her and representatives of this office engaged in. That caused additional pretrial litigation. And so it's just a multitude of factors that contributed to delay after delay after delay. And that was all very, very regrettable. It's very disappointing. I think the delay is what has put us where we are today, where the majority of the families simply wanted it to be over. They did not want to come to court anymore. They did not want to be getting these phone calls anymore. Mm-hmm. And, we were still a year, 2 years away from a trial date. And there's a potential, if the social media comments are any indicia of the fact that it would have been very difficult, if not impossible, to find 12 fair and impartial jurors here in El Paso. That people here feel very strongly about the case, one way or the other. And I think there was a strong likelihood that we would have had to move the case out of El Paso, which would have been even more delay. And once we spoke, through all that with the families, like I said, it became very clear to me what the call should be.
Is there anything else you'd like to add that maybe I haven't asked you?
No, I'm very grateful that for the last few days the focus has been on the families. That's what I said at the plea, and their loved ones. What we saw take place in the courtroom it's just it's like I said, it's extraordinary, and I think the statements that we saw represent the entire spectrum of how this community feels, how the families feel, and my hope is that with this case coming to an end, with no more hearings, no more appeals, that we will never hear or speak of this defendant's name ever again, and until he dies in prison.
Well, thank you so much.
All
El
right.
Paso District Attorney James
Appreciate it, Paul.
Montoya. I appreciate
Thank you.
your time.
Thank you.
We'll have more tonight on KVIA.com and on ABC7 at 10 o'clock. Let's go ahead and get the storm track weather now.
Yeah, here's your weather forecast from Storm Tracker Olivia Vera.